Hello guys, welcome back to part 4 of my Reading Around the World Challenge video updates. This is part 4, but you do not have to watch anything in a particular order because I'm not reading anything in a particular order. I'm just taking recommendations as I get them. So I have 8 here today in physical form. 2 or 3 of them I listen to audiobooks. I actually prefer this side with all the little tabbies. And I will say there are a lot of heavy hitters in this video. Had quite a few in here that were really sad, really tense, really discussing some pretty intense themes. Anyway, just a warning before we get any further into the video. If you see me looking down, it is because I will be looking at the copious notes that I just transcribed from my reading journal. These are gonna go in order in which I read them, so we'll go chronologically. But it just so happens that the one that I read at the beginning of this year, it is the only 5-star read, and it's for Taiwan, and it is The Membranes by Chi Ta-wei. This was one that I found from another YouTuber doing this challenge. This was the book that she also chose for Taiwan. And when she described it, I thought that sounds really cool. It's science fiction. Essentially, humanity has migrated underwater due to climate change. So we live in these little bubbles on the ocean floor. It's kind of like a modern day Noah's Ark. And our main character is named Momo. She's employed at this salon where people's skins, they're called M skins, are removed. She removes them and collects them. And it's kind of like a way that mega corporations harvest data because these skins record everything. Kind of like our phones are nowadays. And Momo is very estranged from her mother. So the main relationship that this tackles is Momo and her mother's very awkward, tension-filled relationship. It really confronts the ideas of intellectual property, virtual reality, dystopic living. It takes all of that to just a level that I was not expecting in such a short book. The plot twist was, I'm gonna say unguessable. I cannot imagine anybody ever guessing the twist at the end. I didn't feel like there were any foreshadowing, any little breadcrumbs left for us in the beginning to even intimate that that would happen in the end. So there's lots of kind of suggestions around gender and free will, like I said, intellectual property, and just the military-industrial complex. It's even worse than it is today. I don't think I will ever forget this book or that plot twist because it was so insane. So if you read any of these, please read this one. It's short, it'll boggle your mind. Next up, I read for Palestine. In March, I read Minor Detail by Danya Shibli. This was 4 stars. I think the only reason why I knocked it a star was because of the writing was just very basic. It was very simple, which honestly is probably kind of the point. It's not the type of book that really needs flowery language. But it's very short, and it's actually divided up into 2 parts. So we have 2 main characters who we're following. Part 1, we are following an Israeli not a soldier, I was gonna say soldier, an Israeli general who ends up committing the crime that I think is mentioned in the blurb, so I'm not ruining anything. And then so part 2 focuses on a young woman who kind of becomes obsessed with this story about the crime, simply for the fact that it happened on her birthday, 25 years before. And so she kind of goes on a mission to try to uncover more information about the crime. The author really builds the tension as our Israeli general stumbles upon a Bedouin woman wandering in the desert, and he takes her in, and you kind of don't know. It's very taut prose. Like I said, it's very simple writing because there's a lot of tension of you don't know exactly what's going to happen to this woman. And again, this was one that actually had a twist ending for sure. It's so abrupt, it's so intense. Like I said, this video is going to be full of some really heavy books, really intense, sad books, and this is one of them. But if it sounds like something you might be interested in, that's Minor Detail. Next up, we have one that still deals with death and some heavier topics, but in sort of a magical realism sort of way. And this was for Mozambique, and that is Mia Kyoto's Confession of the Lioness. This author is one of the most prominent authors in Portuguese-speaking Africa. This I read back in April, and I gave it 4 stars. So we are following, again, 2 characters, a man and a woman, a young African girl named Miriamar, I believe that's how you say her name, and she's actually paralyzed from the waist down. I don't remember if it's explained what happened there, but it's actually the sort of tragic things that has happened right at the start of the book is that her sister has just been attacked by a lion. And this is a thing that's been happening in the village, and they can't figure out what's going on. There's a lot of suspicions. The villagers aren't totally sure because some of the behavior of the lions is a little bit bizarre. They're not totally sure if it's actually lion attacks or if it's like some sort of other villagers from somewhere else attacking people and making it look like a lion attack. It's sort of like very ambiguous in the beginning. And then our second narrator, our second point of view is Archangel Bullseye. That is his name. And he's a hunter. He's hired by the village, and he is there to hunt and kill the lions that are killing the villagers. This was really interesting in the sense of kind of what we focused on for most of the book. Again, a lot of these are a little bit on the shorter side, just so I can try to get through as many books as quickly as possible, even though the last time I posted one of these videos was like 6 months ago. The main kind of thing that we're focusing on is the backstory of each of the characters. But I was expecting maybe a little bit more action because it is about like these, lions attacking the villagers, and it seems very sort of like of the moment, and I was expecting it to maybe be a little bit more action-y. I don't know. And then we see kind of how these two very dissimilar people share some qualities as more things about their past are sort of revealed. And sort of the main thing is that they're both kind of devoured by this need to be loved and like to be desired. There was absolutely a twist in the final line of this book. I'm kind of wondering if I should do a whole separate video of books that have such a crazy ending, like the last couple of sentences or the last couple of paragraphs. If you want to see a video where I just talk about books that have an insane ending line that kind of make you rethink the entire novel, and this is one that has one of those kind of lines, let me know in the comments because that could be kind of an interesting video. Like I said, there were magical realism elements throughout. So I know like in African folklore and mythology, lions symbolize like bravery and courage and wisdom. And so half the time you're like wondering, are these lions even real? Or are they just a symbol for something or like a metaphor for something that the characters are discovering about themselves? Because so much of it, like I said, is about the characters and their backstory. And by the end, I wasn't really sure. And I think that's okay, and it's supposed to be kind of an open ending. And even though there was no like finite answer, I really did feel like it's kind of one of those books that leaves you with this feeling of like, what is truth? Like it almost leaves you with a question that you're supposed to take with you instead of an answer. That was kind of the overarching feeling that I left the book with, was what even is truth? So that was Confession of a Lioness. Again in April, I read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead for Poland. This was an audiobook, which I do recommend. I really liked the narrator's voice. It's narrated by an older woman because the protagonist is an older woman, an older Polish woman named Janina, and so I loved her voice. So I do actually really recommend the audiobook. It is free with premium Spotify. That is how I listen to all of my audiobooks. A lot of the people who own homes in this area leave during the winter to go summer somewhere else, somewhere sunnier. And so she kind of looks over the houses. She's basically like on neighborhood watch. But then one of them winds up dead. His name is Bigfoot, and I was not totally sure if he was supposed to really be like a humanoid kind of Bigfoot creature because of the way that he is described. I don't know. I wasn't totally sure on that. And I think because this is a book that definitely has some magical realism elements to it, leans pretty heavily on those, I would say. So she's gonna try to solve that mystery of who murdered Bigfoot with astrology, because she's a unique older woman. And as we get closer to the truth, we eventually get our twist ending. And oh boy, was I not at all. I was not expecting it. I was not expecting this one at all. Oh, and this was a recommendation from a comment that I read on my channel. So whoever recommended this to me, thank you so much, because I did enjoy it. I think I ended up giving this like 3.5 stars only because I knew as I was reading it, I could tell that there were things that were going over my head a little bit just because I'm not familiar with Polish culture and folklore, and so I know there were some references in there that I could tell that there were some things that I was missing. If I'd had the background knowledge, this would probably be a much higher rating. There were some really grand kind of universal themes that she addresses in here. So like good versus evil, and then like animal versus human. That's another thing that Confessions of a Lioness addresses pretty, maybe even more directly, and grapples with a little bit more directly, is like what it means to be like that thin line between a human kind of reverting back to sort of this like primal animalistic mode. This would definitely be a good one if you like sort of a whodunit, murder mystery style book, and it's like wintertime and you're wanting something that's a little bit creepy, that's going to take you out into like the Polish forest. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead would be a good listen. And then in May, I read for Sudan, and this is just, I feel like the one that I kept seeing come up for Sudan. It's just a really famous Sudanese novel, and that is Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. Again, and this seems to be kind of a theme with the ones that I read, we have sort of a dual perspective happening. Our narrator is unnamed. He's an unnamed narrator, and he's educated. He's just come back from school back to his village somewhere near the Nile River. And when he returns to this village, there's a man who was not there before, and he's been living among them, and his name is Mustafa Said, and our narrator gets to know him quite well. He actually regales the narrator with basically his life story. So it's very much like a story within a story kind of structure. So if you like that, then you're gonna like this book. There's just a lot of stories about like Mustafa's interaction with like different women throughout his life. Anyway, by the end of his story, he ends up leaving our narrator with, he leaves him in a predicament, particularly because of the time in which it was published. I don't remember. This came out originally in 1969. So at the time, nobody had really written a novel that sort of subverted a lot of kind of European literature at the time, where a white man would go to the Congo or go to Africa, go somewhere that felt very like foreign. This is discussed by the translator in the introduction at the beginning. Really nobody at the time had taken a black man, like an Arab African man, and put him in England or in Europe, or, so it was like subverting the sort of common style of works at the time. The author really questions colonialism, and that wasn't happening too often in literature yet at the time, at least not in Sudanese literature. And he uses languages to describe it almost like a disease or like an infection. This is one of those books that is sort of considered now as the author writing back to the empire. This was another one where there were definitely some references where I was kind of missing the reference a little bit, but the author's prose definitely kept me reading. And then that sort of story within a story structure kind of added this like layer of depth to the narrative. So that was Season of Migration to the North. I gave that one 3.5 stars as well. And then we have one that I found very interesting. This is one of the more interesting concepts, in my opinion. The Palace of Dreams by Ismail Kadar. This is for Albania. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. So we live in this world, in this society, where dreams, the dreams of the Albanian people, are collected, they're monitored, they're basically like translated as if they could be interpreted to mean something. So maybe like a dream could stop a war, like it could prevent a war from happening, or a dream could let the people working at the Palace of Dreams know about, a potential future leader that they need to kind of keep their eyes on. So the Palace of Dreams is all about interpreting dreams. Now that concept is obviously very abstract. It's very cool and unique, but it's very abstract. And a lot of times I struggle with that. But because it's literally a place where they go, like it's literally like a concrete building where they go to do this work, as if it was like an office building and they were doing like a typical 9-to-5 job, it was like totally easily understood. It kind of feels like they're just pencil pushers, because everything's like very tactile. So I love the dichotomy of that, of like they're interpreting dreams, but then it's like they're literally just in a building from 9 to 5, like doing the actual work on paper. So Mark Allam is our main character, and he gets a couple strings pulled for him. I can't remember exactly what or why, but he gets a couple of strings pulled for him in order to get a job at the Palace of Dreams. The first department that he works in is the selection department. So this is just, you know, sort of like your very first kind of low level on the totem pole type of position, where you're just filtering through all of the crap, almost like it's like the slush pile. But he's very quickly promoted to the Department of Interpretation. And so now all of a sudden it's on him to take a huge stack of dreams, of transcribed dreams, and try to comb through and figure out what could be a symbol for this and that, and literally try to interpret the dream. Now, the goal of this, like I was saying earlier, the goal is to potentially find a dream that could have some sort of weight in society. Those are referred to as master dreams. And so he comes across what could potentially be a master dream. And again, the only reason why I didn't give it, like, this would have been like a 5-star read for me, but it's only 200 pages. And for a concept like that, I felt like it was just too short. Like, I felt like it was just a little bit rushed, and it was a solid idea, but maybe the author didn't like really fully like sit with it and let it stew the way that you do with like story ideas, sometimes for years, and you're just sitting with the concept for a couple of years before you even start writing. Just a little bit underdeveloped. Something of note is that it was actually banned immediately upon publication, and I always find that so interesting. Those are always the best books. I'm not entirely sure what he meant, but the author did describe this as his own version of hell. So take that for what you will, and that is the Palace of Dreams. Okay, we are nearing the end. Next up is Algeria, and this is one I feel like it doesn't really need much introduction. It's a Camus. This was 4 stars. It is the tiniest little slip of a book. Like I said at the beginning, it's a bit sad, it's heavy. It is described as an existential novel. That's kind of what Camus was known for, apparently. I somehow never read him. Throughout my degree, getting my English degree, his name came up, but we never actually read him, if I recall. This follows a man named Meursault. And Meursault is kind of different. He's a little bit of a nonconformist in the sense that he doesn't really show emotion in the same way that like a normal human is expected to show emotion. So his mom dies right at the beginning. I think that might even be in the blurb. And so he doesn't cry, and he's not showing any kind of emotion. Something very life-changing happens very quickly, very unexpectedly. Because of this thing that's happened, he ends up getting tried. So we follow him throughout his trial. We follow him throughout like while he's being kept in prison. In the meantime, it feels very personal. Again, even though it's so short, we get like what feels like quite a bit of like time, and time also starts to sort of like dilate and get a little wonky for him while he's in prison. I think the thing that kept me reading is we get these one-liners from Camus every now and then, something relating to the unpredictability of life or the absurdity of life that just feels so real and raw, and is just written in such an easily understandable way that just kind of hits you, and you just have to like pause for a second to like process that sentence. It was 4 stars, and that was The Outsider. Next up was another one that I bought recently from Penguin Modern Classics. I just love these colors and the covers. I'm obsessed with the way that they look. I think that they just feel so pleasant to hold while you're reading them. For Austria, I read a short story collection. This is 6 stories by Stefan Zweig. Read this in July. This was 4.5 stars. This was probably the best written. This man has such a grasp on language, which is insane because it wasn't originally written in English, and I just don't understand. I don't understand. Maybe it's the translator that I should be praising. Jonathan Katz did a wonderful job. Wow. Like it is a little bit flowery. It's a little bit much sometimes in terms of like the descriptions and things. I feel like if you've read like Diana Gabaldon, any of the Outlander books, or like Hilary Mantel, there's just something about that writing where it's just so, everything is pushing the story forward, but it's beautifully described. You can see everything so perfectly in your mind. I feel like if you need a master class in character specifically, like character development, character description, he is one you should turn to because he does a fabulous job. One of my favorite stories was Leporella, and it's about a maid who is believed to be very dumb, but she, the sort of actual plot is she becomes so like obsessed with her master, the man that she works for. He's always complaining about his wife. So she decides she's going to try to take out the wife, just like to please him, to further please him. But the way that she is described, her physical mannerisms, you know, how she looks, her intelligence, her emotions, how she feels things. It's just, I felt like I was studying, I was almost like back in college studying a short story specifically like to look at character because it was so well done. It was so good. I just found the language to be so exquisite, somehow without being overdone. So he just struck the perfect balance. I don't know how, but he did. Anything by him, I would imagine, would do the trick. So that was 6 stories. Okay, and then for the Czech Republic, this is a pretty popular one as far as I'm aware. I feel like it's one of those books everybody's read but me. So that is Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Read this in August. This was 3 stars. The only reason why I had to knock it a couple of stars is because of the structure, the way it was written. It's not my favorite writing style where it's not written chronologically. So it takes place in 1968. We're in Prague. Let me just set the scene. And we are following Thomas, who's a bit of a womanizer. He's a bachelor who's run out on his family, basically. And Teresa is a waitress who like meets him once and falls in love or something. And so they end up marrying, but then he keeps his mistress, a couple of mistresses on the side, the main one being Sabina, who is this beautiful painter. Sabina needs her own novel. I just want to read all about her. She seemed the most interesting. So we jump around in time a lot, and it's kind of more threaded together based on like associated ideas, and I didn't know that going into it. I had to read some criticism and stuff afterwards, and so I found that out after, and I was like, oh well, that would have been great going into it knowing that. In spite of that, I did enjoy it. It's very much about relationships, whether or not they're going to leave Prague as the Soviets have occupied Prague. It's written in first person perspective sometimes from the author, and it's semi-biographical, but it's not a memoir. It's just it pushes the boundaries a little bit, pushes the envelope, which I like in a novel. But if you go into it not knowing that, I feel like you might be a teensy bit confused, as I was. So this is why I'm giving you that information now. He is great at carving out a character, posing really philosophical questions, and then like distilling these really big concepts into like bite-sized sentences. So the writing is really excellent, the way he's able to kind of push his ideas forward and do it in a really clever way. I liked. So the structure was a little bit jarring, took me out of the story fairly frequently, but it was beautifully written, and that's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Last I read for Germany, I have one that I just finished, and then I have like an honorable mention if you want to stay till the very end. So for Germany, I listened to The End of Loneliness by Benedict Wells. And I gave this 3.5 stars. Thank you so much to the person who recommended this to me, because I believe it was one that I pulled from the comment section. This one, again, it's another sad one. The End of Loneliness is a little bit of a misnomer maybe, because it does feel quite sad and quite lonely throughout. This one follows 3 siblings. Marty, Liz, and Jules. We're kind of focusing on Jules the most because they lose their parents really early in the novel and they're sent to a boarding school. And we follow them from like their early teens, basically like into adulthood. There was several pretty big time jumps. The writing was very simple, and there was quite a bit of like telling instead of showing me, which I don't love, because I felt like we just moved past the scenes so quickly sometimes. I was just waiting for like a really good description, and it's just not that kind of writing style. So one of the happier things about this novel is that it does focus on a love story between Jules and Alva, who I believe he met in school, but they never really admitted feelings for each other, and then later in life they kind of get together. And overall the main theme is grief here. This is a book about grief above all else, you know, grief over the loss of loved ones, grief over the loss of like a version of yourself who you might have become had they lived, like had you known them sooner or known them longer, which I think is such a fascinating concept. This book dives into that really, really well, is the concept of like who would I be if I hadn't met this person, or who would I be if I had known this, met this person earlier. All of the different little alternate realities that we could be living out simultaneously based on like little decisions that we've made throughout our lives. I always find that really fascinating. And then along with grief, it does explore fate versus chance, love, sickness. It ultimately kind of asks the question of like what makes a life, which is a big question, but it grapples with it really well. So if you're in for something a little bit sad, also really beautiful, then you might want to read The End of Loneliness. And then finally, quickly, as a little bonus for Germany, this was one I read before I started this challenge. I read it back in 2020. It was a recommendation from my boyfriend, and this was 4 stars, and that is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, what to say about this book. I generally hear good things about the film and the book. It's just very grotesque, so you have to be aware of that. It's a little bit like Lolita, just in the sense that you are simultaneously reading something that is so disturbing and so gross, but it's like so beautifully written. The way it's being told to us feels very beautiful. So it's like that weird dichotomous feeling of like being so obsessed with this book, but then also being like so grossed out by it at the same time, which I think is a really fun, it's a really cool thing for an author to be able to do that. It's kind of a fun feeling. So anyway, basically it is about a main character, I forget his name, but he's gifted with an exceptional nose, and he wants to bottle the scent of a virgin because they smell the best. So he wants to create like the ultimate perfume. And I feel like that gives you the vibe. I feel like that says enough. I'm gonna close my notes now. So highly recommend Perfume if you don't mind being a little bit grossed out. And that is it. That is everything. That is the 10 or 11 that I have read in the past few months. So of course, leave me recommendations as always in the comments. If you have any translated work from anywhere around the world that you have read and that you've enjoyed, please let me know, because I am always on the hunt for new recommendations. But if you made it this far, you're fabulous, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.